All right, very good morning to everyone. So glad to see you this beautiful Sunday morning here at Margaret Street Church of Christ. We're glad to have you here in the auditorium class. In this class, we are studying the book of Genesis. So if you want to go ahead and open up your Bible to Genesis chapter 26 let's see here, 25. That's where we're going to pick up. We've been studying the book of Genesis now for several weeks. This is the schedule we've been going by. And so here, July the 28th, we're getting into chapters 25 through 31. This is more of an overview of the book rather than a verse-by-verse study, because we're just trying to cover an entire book in one quarter. And the way we've decided to do this is divide it up into sections of beginnings. So the book of Genesis is about beginnings. And so we started out with the beginning of everything in chapters 1 and 2. And then in chapter 3, we see the beginning of sin. Chapters 4 and 5, we see with Cain being sent out, we have the beginning of what would be civilization. And then there's a new beginning after God decides to destroy the world because it was full of evil, and starts over with Noah and his family. Then in chapters 12, we see where God chose a specific family, so that is the beginning of a new covenant, which we are still in here in chapter 25. We then moved into the beginning of bitter rivals. To this day, there are the results and the consequences that have happened between Sarah and Hagar down to this day. And then we have the beginning of a chosen family, and then today the beginning of the descendants as we continue to work through. And once again, I appreciate Brother Chris who filled in for me a couple of weeks ago. So the way we're doing this is using an outline of those beginnings. And that outline has several other elements to it that not only can we divide it into all these beginnings of, but then we also see, for example, chapters 1 and 2, the primary personality there is Adam, and then the serpent in chapter 3. As we move on up to where we are now, the primary personalities in these chapters are Esau and Jacob. Of course, Isaac, but we've already looked at Isaac being the son of promise in the previous ones. And this is going to deal, these next several chapters, with the life of Jacob. So that's where we are, and that's what we've been studying. So in chapters 25 through 31, and it's unlikely we'll get through every one of these today, but we have a little bit of leeway built into the class. So if we don't cover it all, we'll be able to pick it up next week. So chapter 25, as you can see here with this outline, we have Abraham's death and his descendants, and then we get into Isaac and Abimelech, and then Isaac blessing Jacob, Jacob's dream, Jacob marrying Leah and Rachel, Jacob's children, and Jacob flees Laban. And I think now, looking at our outline, you can see why this is called the beginning of the descendants or the offspring, and the focus being Esau and Jacob. So let's begin in chapter 25. Abraham again took a wife, and her name was Keturah. Now, if you remember where we are in the story, the last chapter, we had Sarah, who had passed away and was buried in that place, the cave of Machpelah, that plot of land that Abraham purchased, and I showed you pictures of that, what that looks like today. And she went on to bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, pay attention to this one, Midian. That's where we get the Midianites that we'll see later. Ishbak and Shua. Jokshan begot Sheba. Does that sound familiar? The queen of Sheba later on that comes to visit Solomon. So we see where some of these nations, where some of these peoples came from, and they're right here still traced back to Abraham. And then it goes on to list all the other sons. And then verse 7, this is the sum of the years of Abraham's life which he lived, 175 years. I think the oldest person we have at Margaret Street right now, currently attending, is Miss Josie. Am I correct? I think 92 or 93 years. Just had a birthday. And couldn't resist, had to get up and help and everything else. And can you imagine 175 years? Winston, you got a long ways to go, brother. 175 years. Woo! That is a long time. Then Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age. I would say so. 175 is a good old age, a man full of years. And this phrase that is used over and over in the Old Testament, it's a beautiful phrase that has so much meaning to it, and was gathered to his people. A couple of ways you could look at that. One is that he was then put with his people. Just as we have in our cemeteries, we have plots where there will be somebody buried and then later a family member buried next to him, maybe another family member. And we're going to see that because indeed, verse 9, his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, which is in Mamre. That's that place that I was talking about, the cave of the patriarchs, that temple or that building that is there now that we showed you last week. But it also means gathered to his peoples as in spiritual. All right. What do we say often whenever someone passes, like, oh, they're now with so-and-so. All right. So in Abraham's bosom is what Jesus called it whenever he was talking about the Hadean realm, the place of waiting. That's where people gather now, and they're gathered to their people. So Abraham has passed. And now we see the descendants of Ishmael. If we jump down to verse 17, these were the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. And he breathed his last and died, and he was gathered to his people. And they dwelt from Havilah as far as Shur to the east of Egypt, and goes towards Assyria, and he died in the presence of all his brethren. Now we get into the birth of Jacob and Esau, and the selling of Esau's birthright in this same chapter. So before we go there, we'll take a quick look at these descendants that they just mentioned. So I know you can't read that, that's pretty small writing, but it starts way back here with Noah, comes down to his three sons below him, and then all of the descendants that come off of those three. And as you follow the descendants of Shem, and you come down to Terah, and then you come down where you see that red circle, there's Abraham. And then across, you can see his wives, Keturah, Hagar, and Sarah. And then off to the side, you see where through Sarah, now you start to have even more and more descendants. I'll give you this one that we talked about from previous when we were talking about Hagar and the bitter rivalry between her and Sarah, and lasting all the way to today, because the Muslims claim to be descendants of one of Ishmael's children, Kedar. And so through Kedar, they trace back through a descendant called Quraysh, and then through that down to Muhammad. And of course, most of us are familiar with Isaac's children, which is, well, hey, I have to say, look who's walking through the door. Oh man, it is so good to see y'all. Two baby twins. And the Henrys are back with us. So very glad to see you guys. We're glad to have you back. We've been praying for y'all, and God answered prayers, and we're so glad to see. Matthew's going to be bulked pretty soon, man, carrying two babies all the time. How about that? So we know the descendants of Sarah through Isaac, and then Jacob and the 12 tribes, which of course is the lineage of Jesus. And so over to the right, you see the descendants of Keturah. And so from Abraham, lots and lots of people, lots of nations came out. So let's review. What was the promise that God gave to Abraham? What was the covenant that God gave to Abraham when his wife was barren? He'd be the father of many nations. His descendants would be like the sands of the beach or something like that, the stars of the sky. And yet here is an example of that, of what we see today looking back. So if we zoom in a little bit, we see Abraham's lineage we're going to come into now when we come down into Jacob and Esau. So that's what I want to get to now. So verse 19, this is the genealogy of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah his wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Paddan Aram, and the sister of Laban the Syrian. Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah his wife conceived. But the children struggled together within her, and she said, "If all is well, why am I this way?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb. Two people shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." Before the children were ever born, God made a decision. Before anything had happened, before any merit, if you will, or any actions, any decisions were made, God already made the decision. What is the decision? Who is going to be the prominent of those two children? Well, it doesn't say Jacob. What does it say there? There you go. That's what I wanted you to get. You are correct, sir, but it doesn't have the name. It just says the younger. The younger shall serve the older. What is God's decision? The younger shall serve the older. All right. Well, so with that in mind, you need to pay attention to what happens over the next several verses. God made a choice. So, when her days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red and was like a hairy garment all over, so they called his name Esau. Afterwards his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel, so his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. So the boys grew, and Esau was a skilled hunter, a man of the field. But Jacob was a mild man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. All right, a few little things here. One is you have these two children, and in the case, it's interesting that we're studying about twins, right, as the twins come in tonight, and we have Tara here who can relate to a lot of what's going on here. You have these twins, and you have the one that comes out first, so that would be considered the older, and then Jacob is the younger. So automatically going back to what God told her, which one is going to serve which. Now we get into what Mike said. They will serve Jacob. Jacob will be the prominent of the two. And then he goes on to say that Esau was this manly man. He was a hunter. He would fit right in with Mike Scott right here. Mike loves to hunt. And the other one was, well, he was just weak and effeminate. That's what we think sometimes, isn't it? Whenever we hear that word, he was a mild man. That's not what the word means. In fact, if you look in other places, like in Job, it is blameless. So in other words, he was a good man. So sometimes when we see things like a mild man, we might automatically think, oh, well, if one man is a manly man, then the other one must have been a scrawny or something. No, it's not that at all. It's just a completely different vocation, a completely different way. He wasn't weak or anything else. In fact, it even means he was whole. He was a complete person. So just two different types of people. Now, we get into this part of the story. We'll come back to this in a minute. We get into this part of the story, this famous part of the stew. So as they grow, notice Isaac loves Esau and Rebekah loves Jacob. I know parents like to say, you're not supposed to love one over the other, but y'all do. Y'all do. You have your favorites. Even my own parents finally admitted to me and my brother which one was their favorite. And we were okay with it because we already knew. Now Jacob cooked a stew, and Esau came in from the field, and he was weary. And Esau said to Jacob, please feed me with that same red stew, for I am hungry. Therefore his name was called Edom. Now the word Edom means red. And so here you have this red stew. You have this man, whenever he was born, he came out red because he was hairy and everything. And so this is where obviously the Edomites come from later, which shows you the relationship whenever God is condemning them for not helping their brethren. Whenever the Babylonians and others came in, the Edomites just stood by. There was always an issue with the Edomites. They're brethren, because right here you can see, trace back their lineage to Jacob and Esau. But Jacob said, sell me your birthright as of this day. You know, there's been time, I got a little brother, and there's been times whenever I come in and my brother is cooking something, maybe fixing a pizza or something like, hey, give me a piece of that pizza. I can't think of one time when my brother turned around and said, sell me your birthright and I'll give you a piece. Right? It's not something that we think about or do. So what's going on here? Why is this so important and why does this matter? And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with what God said. So he says, sell me your birthright. Now, you need to understand what a birthright means. In that culture, the birthright had significance because whoever was the firstborn, God had placed upon it, and the culture had begun to place upon it, that whoever was the firstborn, whenever the patriarch of the family passed away, he would become the leader of the household, of the family. And their family stayed together. It's not like us Americans. We're so independent. A lot of times, whenever we get to the adult age, we go off on our own. Whereas these Semitic families, they would typically stay together and they would build on another section to their tent. And their tents just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger because the whole family is all together. And you have the one patriarch. In this case was Isaac because Abraham had passed. So that person, the firstborn, would become the patriarch of the family. Very important point and position. Secondly, there was also the culture that the firstborn would receive a double portion. So in my case, in my family, if my dad passes away, we have a considerable amount of land and some other things that it would basically be divided into 3 parts. I would get 2 and my brother would get 1. That's what's happening here. So it's very significant. But look what happens. Verse 32. Esau said, look, I'm about to die, and what profit shall this birthright be to me? Again, I've been very, very hungry in my time. The man had just been out hunting. Was he really at the point of death? No. So essentially what he's saying here is like, I'm going to die one day anyway. What difference does it make? I'm hungry. Give me something to eat. So he goes on and says, swear to me this day. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Now what's the problem here? Let's back up and think about what did God say? Remember what I said a minute ago? God made a decision before they were ever born. So why are these men even talking about this? Any thoughts? Okay. So why are they thinking that way?
It's God's plan.
Well, God's plan is that the older will serve the younger, but what is their plan? What is it that they're doing here? They're having basically a man-centered idea. They're thinking, I guess we need to help God. Or maybe Jacob is thinking, I need to help God with this plan. Or this is how I think it should be. Does that make sense? What's happening is man is making decisions about something that they have no business making. Number one, it wasn't Esau's birthright to sell. God already made a decision, so it wasn't his to sell. He couldn't sell something he didn't possess, and Jacob couldn't buy something that he already had. Does that make sense? God had already decided what was going to happen in this whole situation. And so here we have men making decisions that have nothing to do with what God wants. They're not waiting on God's timing. They're not putting it in God's hands. They're not submitting to His will. And so he eats the lentils. Now we get into verse 26, and we're going to see this come up again in a little bit. So in verse 26, there was a famine in the land, besides the first famine that was in the days of Abraham, and Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines in Gerar. It's important that you pay attention to the way the Bible's written. He says there's another famine, so that you don't get confused, because this story is going to sound very, very familiar to another story that we read earlier. All right? And then it says he went down to Abimelech. So does that already sound familiar to you? Where have we seen this? As we continue reading, it says, go down and look down what happens in verse 7. Then the men of the place asked him about his wife, and he said, she is my sister. This is Isaac saying this about Rebekah. He's saying, that's my sister. And why did he say that? Because he was afraid to say she is my wife, because he thought lest the men of the place should kill me for Rebekah, because she is beautiful to behold. Is this ringing a bell for anybody? Wait a minute. What's that old phrase? The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. It's like deja vu all over again. Seriously? Abraham did this twice. Twice he lied about Sarah. And now here we have Isaac going to Abimelech. And if I remember correctly, that's who Abraham went to, Abimelech. So is this the same Abimelech? Would Abimelech not remember? Well, there's a thought that the word Abimelech here is a title, kind of like the word Pharaoh, where we have multiple pharaohs. They just use that Caesar, same thing. It's a title. And so Abimelech is a title. So that's why he says, going back to verse 1, there's a famine in the land besides the first one in the days of Abraham. This is now Isaac, and this is now later. So he's helping us understand the time frame. And notice verse 2. We have a little bit of foreshadowing in verse 2. The Lord appeared to him and said, do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land which I shall tell you. Do we see that again later in the Scriptures? Do this. Yes, we see it multiple times, over and over, especially in the book of Jeremiah. As the Babylonians were beginning to encroach in and the Israelites were getting very worried about everything, one of their thoughts was, let's just go to Egypt. Even after they were destroyed, there was Gedaliah who decided, you know what, let's just go to Egypt. Every time, over and over, it's interesting, the Bible, you'll see over and over God saying, don't go to Egypt. It's not that he's preventing somebody from going somewhere, it's that he wants them to trust him. In every case, had they not gone to Egypt, God would have taken care of them. But they didn't. Instead, they put it in their own trust. So, he tells them to sojourn in the land, and I will bless you for you and your descendants and give you all these lands. Perform the oath which I swore to Abraham your father, and I will make your descendants multiply. So then he goes and he lies just like his father did. It shows, I think, one of the beautiful aspects of the Bible. Whenever we write stories, we human beings, when we write stories, and think about movies that you've seen and the different novels that you've read and stuff, how do they always usually paint the main figure? It's always good, right? They might show a little bit of a weakness here and there, but they never paint them in a bad light. It's always the hero is always the hero, right? It's the villain that they paint in a bad light. And yet right here in the Bible, we have a primary person and we see a weakness of the flesh. We see real people because these are real people making real mistakes. And that should give us hope. It gives me hope that even though Abraham did what he did, God still blessed him. Amen? It gives me hope that Isaac here, even though he is going to lie and everything else, and God still worked through him. And over we see that. David, prime example, a man after God's own heart, and yet he sinned and God still blessed him. And Jacob, over and over. All right, so he lies. has a moment of weakness, and then in verse 8, now it came to pass when he had been there a long time that Abimelech, king of the Philistines, looked through the window and saw there was Isaac showing endearment to Rebekah, his wife. If you have a King James, it's kind of interesting. It says he was sporting with her. Rather interesting word. He was showing endearment to her. And notice, Abimelech called Isaac and said, quite obviously, she is your wife. So how could you say she is my sister? And Isaac said, because I said, lest I die on her account. So it's twice we have one of God's chosen family being rebuked by a pagan king. That's pretty sad. To be rebuked by the world. And so here is a lesson for us. All right, so then, verse 12, Isaac sowed in the land, reaped that same year 100-fold. The Lord blessed him. Did exactly what God said he would do. The man began to prosper and continued prospering until he became very prosperous. So, verse 14, the Philistines envied him. Some more foreshadowing. What happens whenever the Israelites get down to Egypt? Pharaoh starts getting worried about the Israelites, right? Now the Philistines, verse 15, stopped up all the wells. I want you to pay attention to what happens in this passage right here. It's very interesting. They stop up all the wells which his father's servants had dug in the days of Abraham. Verse 16, and Abimelech said, go away from us, you are much mightier than we. Verse 18, Isaac dug again the wells of water which had been dug in the days of Abraham, and the Philistines stopped them up again. Verse 19, also Isaac's servants dug in the valley and found a well of running water there. But the herdsmen quarreled with Isaac's people, said the water's ours, and they left because they quarreled. Verse 21, then they dug another well, and they quarreled over that one also, so he called its name Sitnah. And he moved from there and dug another well, and they did not quarrel over it, so it's called Rehoboth. For now the Lord has made room for us. And that means plenty of room is what that word means. Then he went up from there to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him that same night, said, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants for my servant Abraham's sake. This is also why this is called the patriarchal period. There are 3 dispensations in the Bible, or periods, eras, epochs. You have this one period that is now over called the patriarchal period, and this is what we mean by it, is God is talking directly to the patriarchs. And there is this worship that is involved of building altars and things like that. You move out of that into what's called the Mosaical dispensation or era, when God now speaks through the law. And that continues for many, many years until you get to Jesus. And now, Hebrews 1:1, we're in the Christian area, which is not complete, by the way. These two are complete and over, but this one is not. We're still in the Christian age. And today, God speaks to us through His Son, through the Word that was written. And so you see this interesting interaction that happens between God Almighty and Isaac. Could you imagine God speaking to you directly? It would be amazing, wouldn't it, to be in that position? But no wonder they had the faith that they had. So he built an altar because God showed up there, verse 25, and called the name of the Lord, and he pitched his tent. And what do you think they did? What seems to be the habit of these men wherever they go? They dig a well. So over and over we have all these things that are happening. They keep digging these wells. And then Abimelech came to him, and it says that, verse 28, they have seen that the Lord is with you. So we said, let there now be an oath between us, between you and us. Let us make a covenant with you, and that you will do to us no harm. So now they are powerful enough that even the kings around them are like, listen, we'll want to live in peace with you. Verse 31, so they swore an oath to one another, and Isaac sent them away, and they departed. And it came to pass that day Isaac's servants came and told him about the well which they had dug. Yet another well. And they called it Sheba. So it's interesting. Abraham, he built altar after altar after. You see him building altars, lots of altars. You see Jacob living in tents. That's going to be his thing. And what's Isaac known for? Digging wells. And notice where it says that they went. It says they called it Sheba. Therefore, the name of the city is Beersheba to this day. And yes, to this day, it is still called Beersheba. Whenever we had the opportunity to go to Israel, that was the very first stop that we went to as we got, having flown all night long, get through the airport, get on the bus, and then drive through the Shephelah there and all the way down south. We come to the Tel Beersheba. Very small area. Everybody, if there's nothing else around there, they know that's Beersheba. And guess what's there? A whale. A whale that has been there for thousands of years. And so it was fascinating to stand in a place where we see these stories taking place. It's called Beersheba, and here is this hole in the ground that most likely is going to be that well that Isaac's servants dug. Fascinating. Any thoughts, comments, or anything up to this point? All right. So as we continue, now we get into Genesis 27 and yet another story that's pretty well known in the book of Genesis whenever Isaac blesses Jacob. Now it came to pass when Isaac was old and his eyes were so dim that he could not see, that he called Esau, his older son, to him and said, My son. And he answered and said, Here I am. Behold now, I am old, and I do not know the day of my death. Now therefore, please, take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and make me savory food such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat it, that my soul may bless you before I die. Now Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to Esau his son, and Esau went to the field to hunt game and bring it. So Rebekah spoke to Jacob and said, Indeed, I heard your father speak to Esau your brother, saying, Bring me game and make savory food for me, that I may eat it and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice according to what I command you. Go now to the flock and bring me 2 choice kids of the goats, and I will make a savory food for them, for your father, such as he loves. And you shall take it to your father, that he may eat it, that he may bless you before his death. All right. We started this study back in chapter 25, whenever God gave his will. What's going to happen? Before these 2 boys were ever even born, God made a decision. We've already seen once man get involved and try to help God, manipulate the things, not wait on God. So what's happening here now with Rebekah? Shady Jacob. It's interesting, you know what the name Jacob means? The name Jacob means trickster, con man, something like that. And it comes from the fact that he was grabbing the heel. And you'll see that later whenever Esau says, Is he not rightly named Jacob? So here, but first it's Rebekah before we get Jacob. And Jacob is doing his thing. It's Rebekah who initiates this. Isaac's own wife. So what's going on in Rebekah's mind? Who's the one who received the oracle of God? Rebekah. So we can only surmise that maybe she's thinking, wait a minute. Whoa, Isaac's about to bless. He's about to bless Esau. God told me that he was going to bless Jacob. I got to do something about this. Have you ever been in that position? Have you ever been in a position where you think you're going to help God? Or that maybe you know better than what God knows? Or you think this is what you need to do, that this is God's will? Because that's also what a lot of people do. Yeah, God was working through them. But was God going to work it out without their help? Yes, there you go. Was God going to have Jacob be the one which his son would be one of the descendants? Jesus Christ would come through Jacob. Would God work that out? Yes. And so that's the point I want you to see. So whenever we have Jacob trying to buy a birthright, and now Rebekah trying to kind of maneuver things a little bit. Keep that in mind. God's will always be done. All right. So he even kind of says, but my father will fill me, and I shall seem as a deceiver to him. So immediately Jacob already recognizes, this ain't good, Mom. And she says, verse 13, let your curse be on me, my son, only obey my voice. Go get them for me. So she wasn't even going to hear it. Like, we're doing this. So he goes out, he gets them. She makes the food, and so that, and this I find this rather comical, so that Isaac won't confuse or think that it is Esau, they're going to get some goat hair and put on the smooth of his neck and his hand. So if Isaac reaches out, he's going to feel that hair. I don't know. I find that rather interesting.
Yeah, he suspected something.
Oh, you're right. Let's get to that point. So he went to his father, verse 18, my father, here I am. And he says, who are you, my son? And Jacob said to his father, I am Esau, your firstborn. Lie number one. He lied, right? Then Isaac said to his son, well, how is it that you found the meat so quickly, my son? Because I don't know how much you know about hunting and fishing or anything like that, but it takes a while sometimes to find the game. And then once you get the game, you have to clean it and you have to do all the work that's involved there. It's time process. Whereas if you already have a couple of lambs or something available to you, they're right there. You can obviously speed up the process. So he's already cognizant that this doesn't seem right. And not only that, I don't know about you, but you parents out there, do you know the voice of your children? If they were to call you up on the phone without telling you who they were, would you be able to identify the voices of your children? You have daughters, and they sound different, right? Obviously, boy and girl are going to sound different. But for example, in my case, me and my brother sound very similar. Me, my brother, and my dad all talk very similar. We sound very similar on the phone. And a lot of people, whenever we call them, they're like, is this Troy or Lance or Dwayne? But my dad, he knows exactly who he's talking to. As soon as I say, hey, Dad, which, by the way, my brother does also, immediately my dad knows who it is. You know the voice. Isn't that interesting? Didn't Jesus say, they will know my voice? So he says, how is it that happened? But Isaac said to his son, how is it that you found it? So then Isaac said to Jacob, please come near that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not. So he's already suspecting, as Mike said. He recognizes the voice, but he's like, come here, let me see. So Isaac goes near him, and look what he says. Verse 22, the voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. So now he's confused. That would be confusing. Then he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother's Esau, so he blessed him. Then he said, are you really my son Esau? And Jacob said, I am. Lie number two. He said, bring it near me and I'll eat my son's game so my soul may bless. Actually, that's line number three. Line number two is whenever he asked, how did you get it so quickly? And he said, because the Lord brought it to me. That was the second lie. The third lie is when he says, I am. So he brings it to him, he eats the food, he kisses him, and then we have this blessing beginning in verse 27. Surely the smell of my son is like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. Therefore may God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brethren and let your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be those who bless you. Now, what's interesting is everybody's looking at this blessing of Isaac as if it's something magical. As if, unless you have that blessing of Isaac, then all these other things won't come true. Is that true? No. How was Isaac blessed? Who blessed Isaac? God. Who blessed Abraham? God. Why did he bless Isaac and Abraham? Because he commanded them to stay in the land and trust in him, and God blessed them. So this whole man-centered idea that this blessing that Rebekah is thinking, got to have this blessing, is completely man-centered. It's not what God mandated. And really what happened is all Jacob is doing is simply, all Isaac is doing is simply repeating what God's already blessed Jacob with. You following? So that's why it was so important to understand that oracle back in chapter 25. And then it happened as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, that Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau came in from his hunting. He was very upset. Verse 34, when he heard the words of his father, he cried out exceedingly great bitter cry. He said, Father, bless me, even me also, O my father. You can't write novels better than this, can you? This is real life stuff. And then verse 36, is he not rightly named Jacob? In other words, trickster. Because now twice he's gotten me. Verse 41, so Esau, here's the result of all this conniving and all these things that have been happening. Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand, then I will kill my brother Jacob. What did Jesus Christ say about murder in the Sermon on the Mount? You've heard it said, thou shalt not murder. But I say, what did he say? Don't even think about it in your heart. He who hates his brother. And what do we see right here? Exactly that. It's in his heart, and he hates his brother. So then we have Rebekah sending him away, telling him he needs to go. Verse 28, we get into Isaac now telling Jacob to go to Padan Aram and take for himself a wife from his mother's family, and that may God bless you and you be fruitful. And Esau, verse 6, saw Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away. And then also in verse 8, Esau saw that the daughters of Canaan did not please his father Isaac. So Esau went to Ishmael and took a daughter from Ishmael. So that's still family, but it's off in a different direction there. It's not a daughter of Canaan. And then real quick, we get into Jacob's dream. This is where the idea of Jacob's ladder comes from. In verse 12, he dreamed, and behold, a ladder was set up on the earth, and its top reached the heaven, and there the angels of God were descending and ascending. God goes on to say in verse 15, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go. I will not leave you. Then Jacob woke up from his sleep, verse 16, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Now, it's wonderful that Jacob recognizes how awesome is this, that I'm in the presence of God. And then he sets up this stone. He says, if you will bless me and I'll do all these things, and I will come back, I'll build a house for you right here. Simple question. Is that where God is? Remember what David said? Even if I descend to Sheol, you're there. Wherever I lay my head, you're there. No matter where I go, you're there. So is God in that one place? God is omnipresent. He's everywhere. But it's interesting that Jacob recognizes this. All right, so as I figured, we wouldn't get all the way through. We got up to chapter 29, so at least we got the majority of it. And we'll pick up these other three next week, and we'll add those and continue forward. Any last questions, thoughts, or comments? All right, we're going to take a short break and prepare for our worship. I appreciate very much your kind attention.